Her voice was a thing of beauty, a sound that could calm a storm or start a war. And tonight it was going to cost her everything. The air in Delano Hart's mansion was thick enough to drink, a mix of expensive cigar smoke and the sweet, sharp burn of mezcal. Lantern light dripped over polished floors, glinting off brass spittoons, and the heavy gold chains stretched across Hart's vest. Outside, the desert wind howled like a hungry wolf, rattling the shutters, wanting in. Marisol Vega stood on a small stage in the corner of the ballroom. Her guitar was a familiar weight against her hip, the only thing in this room that felt real. She wore a deep red dress, the one Hart had insisted on. The lace at her throat felt like a chokehold. The skirt was cut just short enough to make the men lean forward in their chairs. She felt their eyes on her, heavy and hot, as she swayed with the music. These were powerful men, ranchers fat on cattle money, prospectors with hands still black from the mines, men who took what they wanted. But she'd never been in Hart's house before. This was different. This was the heart of the spider's web. Her voice, warm and clear, silenced the room. She sang in Spanish, a song her father taught her, a song of summer winds and lost love. Each note was a shield. Each verse was a prayer. When the last note faded into the smoky air, the silence was broken by a single, slow clap. It was Hart. He rose from his chair, a mountain of a man in a tailored suit. His smile was a crack in a stone wall. It didn't reach his cold, flat eyes. "Beautiful, Miss Vega," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Come, have a drink with us, a toast." "I still have 2 songs left," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. "They can wait." It wasn't a request. He poured a glass of mezcal, the clear liquid shimmering in the lamplight. He held it out to her. To refuse in front of his guests would be a mistake, a dangerous one. She took the glass, her fingers brushing his. His skin was dry and cold. She lifted it to her lips, the burn of it a warning. "That's not enough," Hart said, his eyes locked on hers. He was closer now, close enough for her to smell the sweet oil in his hair and the rot beneath it. "Drink." She tipped the glass again, faking a real swallow. The room tilted. Her head felt fuzzy. It wasn't just the liquor. It was the air, the eyes, the feeling of a trap slowly closing. "Let me show you something," he said, and his hand closed around her arm like a manacle. His grip was iron. She tried to pull back. "I should finish my set," but he was already pulling her from the ballroom, away from the light, away from the eyes of his guests. The door to his study shut behind them with a heavy, final click. The sound echoed in the sudden quiet. The study was dark, lit only by a single lamp on a massive desk. Papers were scattered everywhere. Rolled-up maps stood in a bucket like dead soldiers. His hand moved from her arm to her waist, pulling her tight against him. "Don't," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the haze. Hart's smile vanished. "You think you're too good for me? You sing for my coin, Marisol. That dress you're wearing, I paid for it. Everything you have, I paid for." Something inside her snapped. She shoved him, hard. He stumbled back, surprised by her strength. Her hand scrambled across the desk, searching for a weapon. It found a heavy glass bottle. She didn't hesitate. She swung it with all her might. It shattered against the edge of the desk. Glass and liquor exploded outwards. He cursed, clutching his hand where a shard had sliced it open. Blood welled up, dark in the dim light. And she ran. The hallway was a blur of dark wood and flickering light. Shouts erupted behind her. The sound of heavy boots on the floorboards told her they were coming. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. She rounded a corner, her breath tearing at her lungs, and nearly fell. A chain was stretched across the floor. She caught herself, her eyes following the chain into the shadows. And that's when she saw him. A man sat on the floor, his back against the wall. His hair was long and black as a raven's wing. His skin was the color of the desert at sunset. Ochre stripes were painted across his bare chest, the markings of an Apache warrior. His wrists were locked in heavy iron cuffs, the chain bolted to the wall, short enough to keep him from standing. He looked up at her, his eyes calm, ancient. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice a low whisper. "Neither are you," she shot back, her eyes darting to the heavy lock on his cuffs. The footsteps were getting closer, louder. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice a desperate hiss. "A ledger," he said, his voice flat. "Hart keeps one. I came for it." "You want out of here?" "Omar," she asked, pulling a long, sharp hairpin from the intricate braid in her hair. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his gaze weighing something she couldn't understand. "I'm not done yet," he said finally. "Then you'll be dead." The shouts were just around the corner now. She ignored him. She jammed the pin into the lock, twisting, her fingers slick with sweat. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then a click. The heavy lock sprang open. The chain fell slack with a clatter that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. He stood up. He was taller than she'd expected, lean and powerful. For a moment, she thought he would just run, push past her, and leave her to face Hart's men alone. But he didn't. He turned toward the approaching sounds, his body coiled like a snake ready to strike. "Go!" she urged, tugging on his arm. He shook his head, his eyes scanning the hallway. "The ledger! I'm leaving!" she hissed and turned, sprinting down a side passage. The shouts grew louder, closer. She could hear them calling her name. The back door was just ahead, a rectangle of less dark night. She was almost there. Freedom was just a few feet away. Then the wind hit. It wasn't just wind. It was a solid wall of hot air and stinging sand. A haboob. The desert itself was rising up in a furious, churning wave of red-brown dust, swallowing the horizon, swallowing the world. She stumbled out into the yard, into the storm's first breath. Horses screamed in their pens. The lanterns hanging from the porch flickered and died, plunged into a sudden, blinding darkness. The world dissolved into a roaring chaos of wind and sand. A hand clamped down on her arm, pulling her back. She spun around, ready to fight, the broken neck of the bottle still clutched in her hand. It was the Apache. Takat. The iron cuff still dangled from one wrist, a grim bracelet. "You'll get lost in that," he yelled over the scream of the wind. "You said you weren't done," she shouted back, her words ripped away by the gale. "I'm not," he yelled, pulling her down. "But neither are you." The dust hit them like a physical blow. It was like being buried alive. Sand ground against her teeth, whipped her hair across her face, blinding her. Takat pulled her under the low rail of a horse corral, forcing them both flat against the ground. The world shrank to nothing but the roaring darkness and the solid presence of the man beside her. Through the swirling chaos, she saw shapes moving. Hart's men, coughing, their faces covered, stumbling through the storm, searching for them. "This way." Takat's voice was a low command in her ear. He guided her toward the darker shape of a juniper grove, crawling on their bellies. The grit scraped her skin raw. The wind tried to tear them apart. When they finally dropped behind the cover of the first trees, the roar of the storm softened just a little. She lay on her back, her lungs on fire, gasping for air that was more sand than oxygen. Above them, the sky was a terrifying shifting haze of red. Takat was already up, crouching beside her, his eyes scanning the storm-blurred yard. He moved with a predator's stillness, completely at home in the chaos. "You have a name?" he asked, his gaze never leaving the house. "Marisol," she choked out. "And you?" "Takat." He watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded toward the deepening darkness away from Hart's land. "He won't stop looking. You've bought a little time. Not much." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. At the warrior's marks on his chest, at the iron cuff still hanging from his wrist, at the storm reflected in his eyes. And she realized the haboob wasn't the only dangerous, unpredictable force she had just run into. She had traded one cage for another. Only this one had no walls, no bars, just the wide, deadly open desert, and a man who claimed he wasn't done. What did that even mean? What was in that ledger that was worth dying for? And why, after she freed him, did he come back for her? The questions hung in the roaring wind, unanswered. All she knew was that she was running from a monster, side by side with a mystery, and she wasn't sure which one was more dangerous. The storm blew itself out by dawn, leaving the world scoured clean and unnaturally quiet. The sky was a pale, bruised purple. Red dust lay in silent drifts, like fresh snow on the sand. Marisol walked beside Takat, her beautiful red dress now a ruined, gritty rag. Her throat was raw. Every breath felt like swallowing sand. They walked for hours, keeping to the low, winding washes, staying in the long shadows of the juniper stands. The silence between them was as vast as the desert itself. She heard the river before she saw it, a steady, rushing sound, the sound of life in this dry land. When the trees finally parted, she saw it, the Gila River, a broad, green ribbon of water catching the first light of the sun. And on a small rise above the river, nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees, stood a cabin. It was small, its walls made of hand-hewn logs, darkened by years of sun and rain. A thin curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney. Beside it was a low shed, its door half open, the smell of wood shavings and oil hanging in the cool morning air. Takot stopped at the edge of the clearing. "Stay close," he said. It was the first thing he'd said in hours. As they approached, the cabin door swung open. A little girl, no older than 6, darted out. She had 2 tight black braids and her feet were bare, despite the morning chill. She stopped dead when she saw Marisol, her dark eyes narrowing with suspicion. A tiny protector standing guard. "This is Sophia," Takot said, his voice softer than Marisol had ever heard it. "She lives here." The girl, Sophia, said nothing. She just looked Marisol up and down, her gaze intense, as if she were trying to see right through her. Marisol managed a weak smile. "Buenos dias." Sophia's eyes flickered. "You talk funny," she said in perfect, unaccented English, and then just as quickly as she appeared, she darted past them and ran toward the river. "She's wary of strangers," Takot said, though it was obvious. "Come inside." The cabin was one room, clean and spare, with a sleeping loft above. A small table by the window held a jar of beans and a tin coffee pot. A wood stove in the corner radiated a gentle warmth. Takot poured water from a bucket into a basin and handed her a clean cloth. "Wash up. I'll make coffee." The cold water was a shock, but it felt good to scrub the layers of grit from her face and arms. She watched him as he moved around the small space. He was efficient, graceful, no wasted motion. He ground coffee beans in a small hand mill, and the rich, dark smell filled the tiny cabin, chasing away the dust and fear. "What will you do now?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. He glanced at her, his dark eyes seeming to look right through her. "About Hart or about you?" "Either," she said. "I won't go back for the ledger, not yet. He'll be watching for me," he said, pouring hot water over the coffee grounds. "And you?" He paused, studying her for a moment that stretched on a little too long. "You can stay here until you decide what's next." "I can't stay forever," she said, the words coming out faster than she intended. "I didn't say forever." Sophia appeared at the door again, her cheeks flushed from the cold air. "The river's high," she announced to Takot, completely ignoring Marisol. "It's the spring melt from the mountains," Takot explained. "It'll settle down." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Marisol. The heat seeped into her cold fingers. She took a careful sip. It was strong and black and perfect. "Thank you," she said, looking at him over the rim of the cup, "for last night." "You freed me," he said simply. "Then you came back for me in the storm. That was your choice." She didn't know how to respond to that. It was her choice. But why had he made the same one? Later that morning, she found herself helping Sophia string a line for laundry behind the cabin. The girl worked with a quiet competence that was startling in someone so young. Her small hands were deft with the clothespins. "He doesn't bring people here," Sophia said suddenly, her eyes fixed on the shirt she was pinning to the line. It was a statement of fact, but it felt like a test. "I guess that," Marisol replied, her voice soft. The child looked at her then, her dark eyes holding a challenge. "Are you staying?" "For a little while," Marisol said. Sophia seemed to consider this, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and went back to her work. It felt like she had passed some kind of trial. That afternoon, Takot worked in his shed, the rhythmic scrape of a draw knife on wood, a steady, peaceful sound. The scent of juniper was sharp and clean. Marisol watched from the doorway as he shaped a length of pale wood. "What are you making?" she asked. "Something small," he said, not looking up from his work. "Juniper lasts a long time. It's good for things you want to keep." When he was finished, he held it out to her. It was a hairpin, simple and elegant, the grain of the wood flowing like water. It was a perfect, smooth replica of the one she had used to pick the lock on his cuffs. "There's no debt between us," he said, his voice low. "It's just a thing I made." She turned it over and over in her fingers. It was warm from his hands. "Thank you," she whispered. The days fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Marisol patched a tear in Taco's spare shirt. She helped Sophia practice her letters, using a charred stick to write in the dirt. In the evenings, she would take out her guitar, which Taco had carefully cleaned of all the dust, and play by the river. The music felt different here, quieter, more hopeful. On the fourth day, Taco asked, "You ever teach anyone before?" "Not really," she admitted. "I mostly sang in saloons, to pay off my mother's gambling debts." The words left a bitter taste in her mouth. From the corner of the room, Sophia piped up, her voice clear and curious. "Can you teach me to sing?" Marisol looked from the serious little girl to the quiet, watchful man, and for the first time in a long, long time, she felt a real smile reach her eyes. "We'll start with songs," she said. By the end of the week, the quiet cabin wasn't so quiet anymore. 3 other children from the sparse collection of homesteads downriver started coming in the afternoons. They sat in the grass while Marisol led them through simple songs and helped them scratch letters into the earth. But Juniper Bend was a small place, and word travels fast. On a trip to the mercantile for flour, she felt the whispers like a cold draft on the back of her neck. 2 women at the counter, their heads close together. "From Silver City," they say. Hearts looking for her, offered a bounty. The words were a rope, pulling tight around her chest. She kept her head down, paid for the flour, and walked out, her back straight, her heart pounding. Takat was splitting wood when she got back. He took one look at her face and set the axe down. He knew. "You heard something." "They're talking in town," she said, her voice tight. "Hart's offering money for me." He stared off toward the river for a long moment. "He won't stop," he said finally, "and the law in this town belongs to him." "So what do we do?" she asked, a familiar desperation creeping into her voice. "Do we run again?" "For now," he said, turning to face her, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You teach your songs. I'll watch the river." She wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that songs couldn't stop a man like Delano Hart. But the way he said it, the quiet certainty in his voice, stopped her. That night she sat on the cabin steps, the juniper hairpin holding her hair in place, and listened to the river. For the first time, she felt the sharp edges of her fear begin to soften. It wasn't gone, but it was dulled by the quiet persistence of the water and the even quieter persistence of the man in the cabin behind her. But there was something else she didn't understand. This man, Takat, lived a life of near total isolation with this little girl. He was clearly a warrior, a fighter, yet he chose to live here, in peace. Why? And who was Sophia really? She wasn't his daughter. They looked nothing alike, and he never called her that. Every time she thought she had found a safe harbor, she discovered she was just floating in the calm eye of a much larger storm. And she had a terrible feeling the storm was about to start again. By the first week of May, the lessons by the river had become a ritual. Sophia sat pressed against Marisol's side, her small voice surprisingly true, while the other children struggled to wrap their mouths around the Spanish words of Cielito Lindo. They were clumsy, but they were happy. Takut was always nearby, watching. He never joined in, but she felt his presence like a steady warmth at her back. After the lesson, as the children scattered, he walked over. "You make it worth listening to," he said. It was high praise coming from him, but there was a shadow in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. He was worried. Letting her draw people in, letting her put down even these shallow roots, was a risk. 2 days later, the risk took shape. A man came to the cabin leading a mule loaded with 2 heavy sacks of flour. He wore a bowler hat pulled low, and his smile was all teeth. "Brought this from the mercantile," he said, dumping the sacks on the ground. "Paid for already." Takat's body went rigid. "By who?" The man's smile widened. "Fella in town. Said to tell you it's for the lady here. A thank you for the songs." He tipped his hat. Said he'd be back to hear her sing for him again sometime. Marisol's blood ran cold. She didn't need to hear the name. It was Hart, a gift that was really a threat. A reminder that he knew exactly where she was, that he could reach her anytime he wanted. Takat waited until the man was gone. He's reminding you he can reach you anywhere, he said, his voice a low growl. She stared at the sacks of flour. They felt as heavy as tombstones. We can't use that, he nodded. We'll trade it in town for something else. Let someone else take his bait. But as he moved to haul the sacks into the shed, one of them caught on a nail and ripped open. White flour puffed into the air, and something small and dark fell out, landing softly in the dust. It was a locket, a small, tarnished silver locket, shaped like a heart. Marisol's breath caught in her throat. She stumbled forward, her legs suddenly weak, and picked it up. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely open it. Inside there was a faded miniature portrait of a woman with Marisol's eyes. It was her mother's locket, the one she was wearing the day she disappeared. The day Marisol was told she'd run off, leaving her daughter to pay for her gambling addiction. But that was a lie. Marisol knew it now. Her mother hadn't run away. Hart had done something to her. This wasn't just a threat. It was a message. A sick, twisted boast. I have what's left of your mother, and soon I'll have you too. The ledger. Suddenly it all made a terrible kind of sense. Her mother's gambling debts. They weren't from cards. She must have discovered what Hart was doing, found his ledger. She wasn't a gambler, she was a threat, and he had eliminated her. The fight was no longer about Marisol's freedom, it was about her mother's justice. We have to get that ledger, she said, her voice a raw whisper. She looked at Takot, her eyes blazing with a new cold fire. We have to show everyone who he is. That night, she couldn't sleep. Takot was in the shed, the rhythmic scrape of his knife a comforting sound in the darkness. When he finally came in, he set a small, newly carved bird on the table. Juniper wood. Its wings were folded as if in sleep. It's for Sophia, he said, but he left it in front of her. My mother wasn't a gambler, Marisol said quietly, staring at the little bird. She was a fighter. He killed her because she found out about him. Takot sat down across from her. I know, he said. Marisol looked up, shocked. What? The ledger, he said, his voice heavy. It doesn't just have his bribes and gun-running deals. It has names. The names of everyone he silenced. The people who owned the land he stole. The miners who questioned his claims. He paused. Sophia's parents are in that book. That's why she's with me. Hart had them killed when they wouldn't sell him their land. The land this cabin is on. The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. The little cabin wasn't just a refuge. It was a fortress. A last stand for the victims of Delano Hart. And she and Takot were its guardians. Tomorrow, he said, his voice low and intense, we burn juniper. It's a tradition for clearing the air, for chasing away what doesn't belong. The next afternoon, the air in the grove above the cabin was thick with the sharp, sweet smell of juniper smoke. Takot had built a small, contained fire. Sophia danced around it, holding the carved bird. Juniper carries prayers to the high country, Takot told them, his voice like a chant. So they don't get lost. He handed Marisol a sprig of the fragrant plant. Hold it in the smoke. Let it take what you don't need to carry anymore. She held the branch over the flames, the smoke curling around her fingers. She thought of the fear, the running. She thought of the lies she'd been told about her mother. She let the smoke take it all. She wouldn't be a victim anymore. She was her mother's daughter. She was a fighter. But peace, even the fragile kind bought with smoke and prayers, never lasts long. 2 nights later, a new man was at their door. He was tall and lean, dressed in a slick city coat, his eyes like chips of glass. He didn't bother with a thin smile. Miss Vega, he said, Mr. Hart has a message. It seems he's worried about the local children. He's taken 2 of them into his care. Little Joseph and Maria, I believe. From the edge of town. Marisol's stomach plummeted. 2 of her students. He says they're safe. For now, the man continued, his voice smooth and cold. But he's a busy man. He'd like this business with the ledger concluded. He says if you bring it to him, he'll send the children home unharmed. Tomorrow night. Alone. Takat stepped forward, his body a wall of silent fury. You tell Hart if he touches them. The messenger simply raised a hand. I'm just the messenger. He tipped his hat and melted back into the darkness. The silence he left behind was suffocating. It's a trap, Takot said, his voice tight with rage. I know, Marisol said. They're bait. She looked at him, her jaw set. And they are my students. I have to go. He'll kill you, and he'll kill the children anyway. Not if I'm smart about it, she said. A plan was already forming in her mind. A dangerous, desperate plan. He thinks I'm a scared little singer. He thinks I'll walk right into his snare. She picked up the little carved bird from the table, its smooth wood a comfort in her hand. He's about to find out how wrong he is. She looked at Takot, her eyes pleading. I can't do this alone. Will you help me? He looked at her for a long, agonizing moment, at the fear she was trying so hard to hide, at the resolve that burned brighter than any fire. We fight him our way, he said finally, not his. The wind was picking up outside, rattling the door in its frame. The storm was coming back, and this time, they weren't going to run from it. They were going to walk right into the heart of it. The first hint of the plan came from a place she never expected. The next afternoon, a boy from the mercantile, Samuel Ortiz, showed up at the cabin, his eyes wide with fear and excitement. A man gave me this for you, he whispered, pressing a damp folded envelope into her hand. Said it was from a friend of your mother's. Paid me a silver dollar to keep quiet. Marisol's hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was cramped, but clear. He thinks you don't know. He moved it. Not the coal house. The old well behind the main barn. Third stone from the top on the north side is loose. He's going to burn it all tomorrow night after he has you. There was no signature. It was a trap within a trap. Hart's message about the children was bait, but someone else knew Hart's real plan. Someone was trying to help her. It's not bait, she said, showing the note to Takot. Or at least, not Hart's bait. Takot's jaw tightened. This changes things. Hart wants you to walk into his parlor. He'll have men waiting. He wants the ledger, she corrected, or he wants to destroy it, and he wants me. A new, bolder plan sparked in her mind. So we'll give him what he wants, just not the way he's expecting. That night when Sophia was asleep, Marisol sat at the table and carefully copied the note onto a fresh piece of paper. But she changed one crucial detail. She changed the location from the old well to the coal house. Then she added a single line at the bottom. Read this to the whole town. She folded the note and tucked it deep inside one of her old boots. In the morning, she knelt in front of Sophia. She handed the little girl the boot. I need you to do something very important, she said, her voice low and serious. Take this to Reverend Miller. Don't let anyone else see it. Don't open it. Tell him it's a matter of life and death for Joseph and Maria. Can you do that for me? Sophia's eyes were wide, but she nodded, clutching the heavy boot to her chest. I understand. Takot watched the exchange from the doorway. When Sophia had slipped away into the trees, a small, silent shadow on a vital mission, he spoke. You don't trust me to do that? I trust you with my life, she said, turning to face him. But if you took that note, you'd follow me to Hart's. And if this goes wrong, someone needs to make sure the truth gets out. Someone needs to be there to rally the town when the time is right. She took a deep breath. You're asking me to let you walk into his arms. I'm asking you to help me get our children back, she replied, and end this. For all of us. For Sophia's parents. For my mother. He stared at her for a long moment, the conflict warring in his eyes. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. I'll gather the men who will stand with us. We'll wait for the Reverend's signal. He picked up a long coil of rope from the corner. Just don't run too soon. Give us time. By evening, Marisol was ready. She braided her hair tight, securing it with the juniper pin Takot had made her. It felt like a talisman, a piece of his strength she could take with her. She put on a simple dark dress. She was no longer the singer in the red dress. She was a warrior going to battle. She didn't take her guitar. She took a small, heavy satchel. and inside she placed a thick, leather-bound book she'd found at the mercantile. It was an old book of county records, but in the dark, it would look like the real thing. It was her own piece of bait. The ride to Hart's estate was the longest of her life. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like an ambush. She followed the river, the water a dark, rushing presence beside her in the moonlight. She left her horse tied a quarter-mile away and approached the estate on foot. The main house was blazing with light, but the grounds were dark. She circled around to the back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The old well was there, just as the note had said, a dark stone circle half overgrown with weeds. Prying the third stone loose was harder than she expected. It was heavy, and her hands were slick with nervous sweat. But finally it shifted. She reached into the dark, cool space behind it. Her fingers brushed against oilcloth. She pulled it out. It was a book, a heavy ledger, wrapped carefully to protect it from the damp. She had it, the proof. Her mother's justice. She didn't even have time to feel triumphant. A voice sliced through the darkness, cold and amused. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Miss Vega." The man from the mercantile, the one with the bowler hat, stepped out from behind the barn. Two other men emerged from the shadows, rifles in their hands. She was surrounded. "Mr. Hart is expecting you," he said with a smirk. They tied her hands in front of her, but not too tightly. They were confident, arrogant. They thought they had won. She let them lead her toward the main house, her face a mask of fear. She had to play her part perfectly. Hart was waiting for her in his study, the same room where she had fought him off what felt like a lifetime ago. The two children, Joseph and Maria, were huddled together on a sofa in the corner, their eyes huge with fear. "The ledger," Hart said, holding out his hand. He didn't even glance at the children. Slowly, deliberately, she swung the satchel from her shoulder and placed it on his desk. "The children first," she said, her voice shaking just enough. Hart laughed, a short, ugly sound. He snapped his fingers. "Take them back to their parents. My generosity knows no bounds." The bowler hat man herded the terrified children out of the room. Hart reached for the satchel, his eyes gleaming with greed and triumph. He pulled out the book inside. He opened it. His face for a split second registered confusion. Then it hardened into pure rage as he saw the meaningless county records. "What is this?" he snarled, throwing the book across the room. "Where is it?" "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Marisol said, her voice suddenly clear and strong. The fear was gone, and at that exact moment, a bell began to toll in the distance. The church bell, in Juniper Bend. One toll, two, three. It was the signal. Hart's head whipped toward the window. Down on the road he could see them. Torches, dozens of them. A river of fire flowing toward his house. The people of the town, led by the Reverend, who was holding up a piece of paper for all to see. Her note, the false directions. "You think a few angry farmers can stop me?" Hart hissed, turning back to her. "They're not here to stop you," a voice said from the doorway. Takat stood there. He wasn't alone. Behind him were half a dozen men, their faces grim, their hands steady on their rifles. They had come in through the back, silent as ghosts, while Hart's men were distracted by the commotion at the front gate. Hart was trapped. His men outside were outnumbered by the town. His men inside were facing Takat. He did the only thing a cornered rat can do. He lunged for the fireplace, grabbing a lit piece of kindling. "If I can't have it, no one will," he screamed, racing for the back door, toward the old well. But Marisol was ready. She kicked a heavy chair into his path. He stumbled, falling hard. The kindling flew from his hand, landing on a pile of papers on his desk. Flames erupted, licking up the dry paper, racing toward the curtains. Takat was on Hart in an instant, dragging him away from the spreading fire. Marisol didn't hesitate. She ran out the back door, into the night, straight for the well. She reached into the hiding place and pulled out the real ledger, just as the first flames began to crawl out the window of the study. She held the book to her chest, the leather cool against her skin. When she walked back into the yard, the whole town was there. The Reverend took the ledger from her hands and held it high for everyone to see. Hart, held between two grim-faced ranchers, let out a howl of fury. It was over. The fire lit up the night sky, a funeral pyre for Delano Hart's reign of terror. Marisol stood beside Takot, the smoke and ash swirling around them, and watched it burn. She could almost feel her mother's presence on the wind, finally at peace. The summer that followed was a time of healing. With the evidence in the ledger, Hart's empire crumbled. The law, no longer in his pocket, saw him sent away for good. The land he had stolen was returned to its rightful owners, including the parcel the cabin stood on, which was deeded back to Sophia, the last of her family. Takot and Marisol rebuilt the town, not with wood and nails, but with music and trust. The lessons by the river grew, becoming a real school. Marisol, the singer who had run for her life, had found her true voice, not in a saloon, but in the laughter of children learning to read. One clear morning, under the shade of the old cottonwood tree that had saved them during the flood, Takot asked her to marry him. Not because you need saving, he said, his voice quiet and sure, because I need you. Their wedding was a town affair. Everyone came. Sophia was the flower girl, scattering wild petals along the path to the river. The Reverend, his voice thick with emotion, spoke the words, but it was their quiet vows, their promises of a shared future, that truly consecrated the union. That evening, as the last of the guests departed and the lanterns burned low, Marisol stood with Takot on the porch of their cabin. The night air smelled of cedar and the rich, damp earth of the riverbank. Sophia was asleep inside, the carved juniper bird clutched in her hand. This, Marisol said, her voice soft, is the home I never thought I'd have, a place that stays. Takot wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. You didn't find it, he whispered into her hair. You built it. She looked out toward the dark line of the pass, once a symbol of escape and fear, now just a peaceful shadow against a sky full of stars. We built it, she corrected softly. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, and the sound of the river, constant and true, was the only heartbeat they would ever need. Thank you for staying with me for this incredible journey. If Marisol and Takot's story of courage and justice touched your heart, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button. And please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Your support means the world and allows me to keep bringing these tales to you. Until next time, stay safe out there.